The lawman's hand trembled as he read the warrant for the third time that morning, standing in the dusty street of Coloma, California, where the August sun of 1876 beat down merciless and unforgiving. Kane Dawson had been tracking wanted criminals for 6 years, ever since he pinned on the marshal's badge at 21. But something about this particular piece of paper made his stomach turn in ways no outlaw had ever managed. The woman's name was Hope Winchester, 23 years old, wanted for theft of $5,000 from the miners' bank in Sacramento. And the sketch showed a face that looked far too gentle to belong to someone who would steal such a sum. Kane folded the warrant and tucked it into his vest pocket as he mounted his bay gelding, a sturdy animal named Rusty, who had carried him through more dangerous situations than he cared to count. The trail led northeast toward the foothills, where informants claimed a young woman matching Hope's description had been spotted working odd jobs and keeping to herself. 3 days of riding brought him to a small settlement barely worthy of being called a town. Just a handful of buildings clustered around a creek where miners panned for whatever gold remained after the rush of '49 had long since faded. He found her in the most unexpected place imaginable, a tiny church with whitewashed walls where she knelt scrubbing the wooden floor with determination etched into every movement. Kane stood in the doorway watching her work, noting the way her dark auburn hair fell loose from its bun, how her simple gray dress was patched but clean, and the calluses visible on her hands even from this distance. She looked up suddenly, those green eyes widening with immediate recognition of what he represented even before she saw the badge on his chest. "Marshal," she said quietly, not attempting to run or plead, just acknowledging his presence with a dignity that struck him harder than any bullet ever had. "I suppose you are here for me." Kane stepped inside, his boots echoing on the floorboards she had just cleaned. "Hope Winchester. That is what people call me." She rose to her feet, setting aside the brush and wiping her hands on her apron. "Though I suspect you already know the answer to that question." He should have pulled out the warrant, read her rights, bound her hands, and started the long journey back to Sacramento, where justice supposedly waited. Instead, Kane found himself studying her face, searching for signs of deception or cruelty, and finding nothing but exhaustion and something that looked remarkably like relief. "The warrant says you stole $5,000 from the miners' bank." "The warrant is correct about the amount," Hope replied, meeting his gaze without flinching, "but wrong about almost everything else." Every instinct Kane had developed as a lawman screamed at him to be cautious, to not fall for a pretty face and a sad story, but something in her voice made him pause. "Explain." Hope gestured toward the wooden pews, and they sat facing each other across the narrow aisle, while she spoke in a voice that never wavered despite the pain threading through every word. "My father owned a small ranch outside Sacramento. When he died 2 years ago, his business partner, a man named Victor Blackwell, produced documents claiming my father owed him $15,000. The ranch was worth maybe $6,000 at best. Victor said he would settle the debt if I married him." Kane felt anger beginning to simmer in his chest. How old was this Victor? 52, with a wife already dead under suspicious circumstances. Hope's hands clenched in her lap. "I refused, so he took the ranch anyway, sold it. And when I tried to contest the debt in court, he produced more papers, all seemingly in order. I discovered later he had a cousin who worked as a clerk in the land office. Everything was falsified, but proving it would take money I did not have and time I could not afford." "So you stole from the bank," Kane said, though the words felt wrong even as he spoke them. Hope shook her head. "I worked as a bookkeeper at the miners' bank. While reviewing accounts, I discovered Victor had been embezzling money for years, hiding it in false accounts under names of people who had left California or died. I found proof he had stolen over $30,000. When I confronted him privately, told him I would report it to the authorities unless he returned my father's ranch and cleared the false debt, he laughed in my face. Kane leaned forward. What happened then? 2 days later, money went missing from the bank, exactly $5,000, and suddenly I was the thief. Tears gathered in Hope's eyes but did not fall. Victor had planned it perfectly. He had my signature on deposit slips, my handwriting on ledgers, and testimony from his cousin saying I had been asking questions about how to access the vault. I ran because I knew no one would believe a woman's word against a man as wealthy and respected as Victor Blackwell. The story had the ring of truth that Kane had learned to recognize, the kind of messy, complicated reality that was never as clean as the warrants made things seem. He pulled out the document that had brought him here, looking at the signature of the judge who had issued it, Judge Harold Blackwell, and the pieces fell into sickening place. The judge who signed this warrant, any relation to Victor, his older brother? Hope's voice was bitter now. I told you, Victor planned everything perfectly. Kane stood and walked to the window, staring out at the settlement where people went about their simple lives unaware of the decision weighing on him. 6 years of upholding the law, of believing the system worked even when it creaked and groaned. And now he held a warrant that was nothing more than a legal weapon wielded by a corrupt man against an innocent woman. He could take Hope back to Sacramento, watch her hang or spend decades in prison for a crime she did not commit. Or he could do something that would end his career and possibly put his own neck in a noose. The match flared bright in the dim church as Kane struck it against the doorframe, holding the flame to the corner of the warrant and watching the paper curl and blacken. Hope gasped behind him, rising from the pew as Kane let the burning document fall to the bare earth outside the door where it turned to ash and scattered in the wind. "What have you done?" she whispered. Kane turned to face her, his heart pounding with the weight of what he had just chosen. "Something I should have done the moment I read that pack of lies. Hope Winchester, you are free to go. But you are a marshal, you cannot just—" "I was a marshal," Kane corrected, unpinning the badge from his vest and holding the silver star in his palm. It had defined him for 6 years, given him purpose and direction, but it meant nothing if it forced him to be complicit in injustice. Now I am just a man who refuses to drag an innocent woman to her death. Hope crossed the space between them in 3 quick steps, her hands gripping his arms as she searched his face. They will come after you now, too. Victor will not stop, and if he discovers you destroyed the warrant, then we make sure he does not discover it. Kane met her eyes, seeing the fear there but also hope, the thing she was named for, flickering to life. I will send a report to my district supervisor saying the trail went cold, that you must have fled to Oregon or maybe Mexico. Victor might send other bounty hunters eventually, but it will buy us time. Us. The word hung between them, fragile and full of possibility. Kane had not meant to say it quite that way, but now that the word was out, he found he did not want to take it back. You cannot stay here, Hope. This settlement is too small, too exposed. Someone will recognize you eventually from wanted posters. You need to disappear completely, build a new life somewhere Victor Blackwell will never think to look. And you, Hope's voice was barely audible. What will you do? The answer came easier than Kane expected, as though some part of him had been waiting for permission to abandon a path that no longer felt right. I grew up on a ranch in Montana before I became a lawman. Been thinking lately that maybe I should have stayed there, worked with horses instead of chasing ghosts. There is good land up north, places where a man could start fresh. Understanding dawned in Hope's eyes, along with something that made Kane's breath catch. "You are offering to help me run." "I am offering you a chance at the life Victor tried to steal." Kane hesitated, then decided honesty was the only currency worth anything in this moment. "And maybe, if you are willing, a chance for both of us to start over." Hope was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an intensity that made Kane feel stripped bare despite being fully clothed. "You do not even know me, Marshal Dawson. How can you be certain I am telling the truth? How do you know I am not exactly the thief they claim?" Kane had asked himself the same question during their conversation, examining her story for holes, and found his answer not in logic but in something deeper. "Because I have looked into the eyes of liars and killers for 6 years, and I know the difference between someone who is guilty and someone who has been wronged. But more than that, because if you were truly a thief clever enough to steal $5,000, you would not be here scrubbing church floors for pennies. You would be living comfortably somewhere far away." A smile flickered across Hope's face, the first he had seen, and it transformed her completely. "That is surprisingly sound reasoning. I have my moments." Kane found himself returning the smile despite the gravity of their situation. "So what do you say, Miss Winchester? Are you willing to take a chance on a disgraced lawman with a decent plan and a strong horse?" Hope glanced around the church, at the clean floors and simple altar, then back at Kane with decision crystallizing in her expression. "I will need to tell Reverend Collins I am leaving. He has been kind to me, gave me work when no one else would. He deserves a proper goodbye." The Reverend proved to be a thin man in his 60s with knowing eyes that assessed Kane thoroughly before speaking. "So, you are taking our Hope away, Marshal. Or should I say, former Marshal, given that I saw what you did with that warrant through the window." Kane stiffened, hand instinctively moving toward his gun, but the Reverend held up a calming hand. "Peace, son. If I thought you meant her harm, we would be having a very different conversation." The Reverend looked at Hope with genuine affection. "This girl has been a blessing to our small congregation, but I knew from the first day she arrived that she was running from something. Never pressed her on it, figured the Lord would work things out in His own time." "I am sorry I lied to you about who I was," Hope said softly. "You never lied, child. You simply did not volunteer information, which is different." Reverend Collins turned back to Kane. "You planning to make an honest woman of her or just help her run?" The question hung in the air, more complex than Kane was ready to address. "I plan to keep her safe and help her build a new life, Reverend. Beyond that, it is up to Hope what she wants." "Good answer." The Reverend nodded approvingly. "Though I will say this, and I mean it kindly to you both, traveling together unmarried will raise questions and draw attention. People notice a young man and woman on the trail together, start telling stories. But a married couple heading north to start a ranch, that is as common as dirt and twice as unremarkable." Hope's cheeks flushed red. "Reverend Collins, we barely know each other. Then you will have plenty of time to learn on the journey." The old man's eyes twinkled with mischief that seemed at odds with his profession. "Unless you would rather travel as brother and sister. Though given the way the Marshal here has not stopped looking at you since he walked in, I suspect that particular lie would not hold up under scrutiny." Kane felt heat rising in his own face, caught in the act of doing exactly what the Reverend accused. There was something about Hope that drew his gaze like a lodestone, something beyond her beauty, a quality of resilience and grace under pressure that resonated with everything Kane valued. "The Reverend makes a practical point," he admitted. "But it is a decision that should be made without pressure. Hope, if you would prefer, a marriage in name only." Hope interrupted, her voice steady despite the continued color in her cheeks. A legal arrangement for the purpose of safety and propriety. Is that what you are suggesting? Kane nodded, though part of him ached at the clinical way she phrased it. Exactly that. I would ask nothing of you beyond companionship on the trail and perhaps help building a ranch once we find suitable land. Separate sleeping arrangements, complete respect for your person and wishes. If you eventually wish to dissolve the arrangement, we can do so. Hope was quiet, thinking, and Kane forced himself not to push, to let her make this choice free from any coercion. Finally, she looked up at Reverend Collins. You would be willing to perform the ceremony. I would be honored. The Reverend gestured toward the altar. Though I should warn you both, I take marriage vows seriously, even ones entered into for practical reasons. I will not include the word obey since I suspect Miss Winchester here has had quite enough of being ordered about, but the promises to honor, cherish, and remain faithful until death, those stay in. Once you make those vows before God, I expect you to mean them, even if the marriage started as convenience. Kane felt the weight of what they were about to do settle over him like a heavy coat, but it did not feel burdensome. Instead, there was a strange sense of rightness to it, as though this moment had been waiting for him at the end of a long road. I understand, Reverend, and I will honor those vows completely. Hope took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. Then let us proceed before wisdom convinces me this is the most foolish thing I have ever done. They had no rings, no wedding finery, no guests beyond two miners who happened to wander in looking for the Reverend and found themselves recruited as witnesses. Hope wore her patched gray dress and Kane his dusty trail clothes, but when the Reverend instructed them to join hands, Kane felt something shift fundamentally in his chest as her fingers intertwined with his. The ceremony was simple and quick, the Reverend speaking the traditional words with a sincerity that made them feel weighty despite the unusual circumstances. When it came time for Kane to make his vows, he looked into Hope's eyes and spoke from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. I, Kane Dawson, take you, Hope Winchester, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to honor you, cherish you, protect you with everything I have, and remain faithful to you until death parts us. I make these vows freely and completely. Hope's voice trembled slightly as she repeated the vows, but her gaze never wavered from his. I, Hope Winchester, take you, Kane Dawson, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to honor you, cherish you, stand beside you through whatever comes, and remain faithful to you until death parts us. I make these vows freely and completely. Then, by the authority vested in me and witnessed before God, I pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Collins smiled warmly at them both. Kane, you may kiss your bride if she is willing. Kane hesitated, acutely aware that this was not a real marriage in the traditional sense. But Hope surprised him by rising on her toes and pressing a soft, brief kiss to his lips. It lasted only a heartbeat, but Kane felt the impact of it down to his bones, a promise of something that might grow given time and patience. The two miners applauded cheerfully, clearly delighted to have witnessed something happy in their hard lives, and the Reverend produced a marriage certificate that he filled out with careful penmanship. This makes it legal in California and any state you travel to. Keep it safe. Hope tucked the precious document into her small bag of possessions while Kane shook the Reverend's hand. Thank you for this. I know it was unusual. The Lord works in mysterious ways, son. The Reverend's expression turned serious. But let me give you some advice born of 50 years living. You have made real vows today, even if the circumstances were unconventional. Honor them, both of you. Do not let this marriage of convenience blind you to the possibility of it becoming something true and lasting. I have seen the way you look at each other, and I would wager my best Bible that given time, you will find this arrangement was less about practicality and more about fate than either of you wants to admit right now." Kane did not believe much in fate, preferring the solid ground of choice and consequence, but he nodded respectfully. "We will do our best, Reverend." They left the settlement within the hour, Hope's few possessions tied behind Kane's saddle while she rode in front of him, the arrangement necessary since they had only one horse and could not risk the delay of acquiring another. Kane was hyper-aware of her body pressed against his, the way she fit naturally into the circle of his arms as he held the reins, the scent of lye soap and something uniquely her that made his head swim. "Where are we heading?" Hope asked as they followed a trail northward through the foothills. "There is a town called Redding about 150 miles north. We can catch a stage coach there that will take us to Oregon, then find another heading to Montana." Kane had been calculating the journey in his head, factoring in money and time. "It will take us most of a month to reach Montana territory, maybe longer depending on conditions." Hope was quiet for a moment, then asked the question Kane had been expecting. "And you are truly willing to give up everything you built as a marshal for someone you just met?" Kane had asked himself the same thing while watching her scrub that church floor, searching for the answer in the deepest parts of himself. "I became a lawman because I believed in justice, in protecting people who could not protect themselves. But somewhere along the way, I started to realize the law and justice are not always the same thing. That warrant I burned was legal, signed by a judge, completely proper according to the system. But it was not just. If following the law means delivering an innocent woman to men who want to destroy her, then maybe I have been following the wrong thing all along." Hope twisted in the saddle to look at him, her face inches from his. "You are either the best man I have ever met or the most foolish." "Probably both," Kane admitted with a slight smile. "But I have made my choice and I do not regret it, not for a second." She studied him for a long moment, then settled back against his chest with a small sigh that might have been contentment or simply exhaustion. "Thank you, Kane Dawson. Whatever happens next, thank you for believing me when no one else did." They rode through the afternoon, following trails that wound through pine forests and along rushing creeks still full from snowmelt despite the summer heat. Kane kept alert for signs of pursuit, but the land remained empty of everything except wildlife and the occasional miner working a played-out claim. As evening approached, he guided Rusty off the main trail to a small clearing near a stream where they could camp without being easily spotted. Hope climbed down stiffly, clearly not accustomed to long hours on horseback, and began gathering deadwood for a fire while Kane tended to Rusty and unpacked their supplies. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that came from shared purpose rather than awkwardness, and Kane found himself appreciating the way Hope moved, economical and efficient without any wasted effort. Dinner was simple beans and hardtack with coffee strong enough to strip paint, but they ate with good appetite while the fire crackled, and night sounds filled the forest around them. Kane had strung up a canvas tarp to create a small shelter, placing his bedroll on one side and Hope's on the other with a respectful distance between them. "Tell me about Montana," Hope said as they sat by the fire after eating. "What is it like?" Kane leaned back against a log, staring into the flames and pulling up memories of his childhood. "Big sky country, wider and more open than anything you have seen in California. The land rolls on forever, mountains in the distance like purple shadows. Winters are brutal, cold enough to freeze your breath, but summers are short and sweet with wildflowers covering the prairies. My family's ranch was in the north, near the Musselshell River, good grazing land for cattle and horses. Was. Hope caught the past tense. Your family does not own it anymore. My father died when I was 19, broke his neck in a riding accident. The old pain was distant now, worn smooth by time. My mother remarried a year later to a man from back east who wanted nothing to do with ranching. They sold everything and moved to St. Louis. I was already working as a deputy by then, did not have the money or the desire to fight them for the land. Hope drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Do you regret it, not fighting for the ranch? Kane considered the question honestly. Sometimes. But I was young and angry, and convinced that I needed to get as far from that place as possible to prove I was my own man. Took me a few years to realize running from home did not solve anything, just gave me different problems. And now we are both running, Hope observed quietly. No. Kane met her eyes across the fire. Running is when you flee without purpose or direction, just trying to stay ahead of whatever is chasing you. We are not running. We are choosing a new path together. That is completely different. Hope smiled, a real genuine smile that made Kane's heart stutter. I like that perspective. Choosing rather than fleeing, it makes me feel less like a coward. You are many things, Hope Dawson, Kane said, using her married name for the first time and watching her reaction. But a coward is not one of them. A coward would have married Victor Blackwell to save herself the trouble of fighting. The use of her new name made Hope's breath catch audibly. That will take some getting used to, being called Hope Dawson. We have time. Kane stood and added more wood to the fire, then gestured toward the shelter. You should get some sleep. We have a long day tomorrow. Hope rose and moved toward her bedroll, then paused. Kane, what happens when we reach Montana and find land? What will people think about us, about this arrangement? Kane had thought about this during the ride, considering how to answer honestly without making Hope uncomfortable. They will think we are a married couple starting a ranch, because that is exactly what we will be, legally and in every way that matters to the outside world. What happens between us privately, how our relationship develops or does not develop, that is something we will figure out as we go. No expectations, no pressure, just two people learning to be partners in whatever form that takes. Hope nodded slowly, seeming satisfied with the answer. That seems fair. Good night, Kane. Good night, Hope. Kane stayed by the fire long after Hope's breathing deepened into sleep, keeping watch and thinking about the rapid series of choices that had brought him to this moment. Less than 12 hours ago, he had been a federal marshal with a clear purpose and defined role. Now he was a man who had destroyed evidence, abandoned his badge, and married a wanted woman he barely knew. By any rational measure, he had lost his mind completely. Yet sitting there under the stars with the soft sound of Hope's sleeping breaths reaching him across the small clearing, Kane felt more at peace than he had in years. Perhaps that was the real insanity, or perhaps it was the first genuinely sane thing he had done since pinning on that badge 6 years ago. Only time would tell. The journey to Redding took 5 days of steady riding, during which Kane and Hope fell into patterns that felt surprisingly natural. They rose with the dawn, traveled until noon when the heat became oppressive, rested through the worst of it in whatever shade they could find, then continued until evening. The forced proximity of sharing a horse meant conversations happened easily, ranging from trivial observations about the landscape to deeper discussions about their pasts, their hopes, their fears about the uncertain future they were riding toward. Kane learned that Hope had taught herself to read using her father's small library of books, that she had a gift for numbers that had made her an excellent bookkeeper, and that she missed her father with an ache that would probably never fully heal. She spoke about growing up on the ranch, about helping with the horses and learning to handle accounts when her father's eyesight began to fail, about the day Victor Blackwell first appeared with his falsified papers, and how her world had crumbled in the space of a single afternoon. In turn, Kane shared stories of his years as a lawman, editing out the worst violence but painting an honest picture of the work, the long, lonely days tracking criminals, the satisfaction of bringing dangerous men to justice, but also the growing disillusionment with a system that seemed to favor the wealthy and connected over ordinary people seeking fairness. He told her about the first time he had to shoot a man, the nightmares that followed, and the slow hardening that happened to anyone who wore a badge long enough. "Did you ever want to be anything else?" Hope asked on the fourth day as they rested beside a creek. "Before you became a lawman." Kane skipped a stone across the water, watching it bounce 3 times before sinking. "I wanted to breed horses, the good sturdy stock that could survive Montana winters and still be fast enough for ranch work. My father had a stallion named Thunder, best horse I ever knew, smart as any dog and twice as loyal. I used to dream about building a breeding program, creating a line of horses that combined Thunder's intelligence with the endurance of the wild mustangs that ran the hills." "That sounds wonderful," Hope said softly. "Why did you give it up?" "Got it in my head that ranching was ordinary, that I needed to do something more exciting, more important." Kane shook his head at his younger self's foolishness. "Turned out that chasing outlaws is less exciting and more terrifying than I expected, and importance is a matter of perspective. A good horse bred right and trained with patience can change a person's life just as much as catching a bank robber." Hope was quiet for a moment, then asked carefully, "Would you want to try again? Breeding horses in Montana?" Kane looked at her, at the genuine interest in her eyes, and felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "I have been thinking about it. Would take time to build up the stock, find foundation animals with the right qualities, but yes, I think I would like to try again. Would you be interested in helping with something like that?" "I know very little about horse breeding," Hope admitted. "But I am good with accounts and planning, and I learn quickly. If you are willing to teach me about the horses, I could handle the business side of things. Partners, then." Kane extended his hand, and Hope shook it solemnly, though they both smiled at the formality given they were already legally married. "Partners," she agreed. They reached Redding on the evening of the 5th day, a bustling town that had grown up around the northern terminus of the California and Oregon Stage Company route. Kane secured a room at a modest hotel, 2 beds pushed against opposite walls of a small, clean space, and tried not to think about the fact that this was technically his wedding night, even if the marriage was one of convenience. Hope seemed equally aware of the strangeness of their situation, moving around the room with careful attention to maintaining appropriate distance. They had shared a camp for 5 nights, but somehow the enclosed space of the hotel room felt far more intimate, charged with unspoken awareness of each other. "I will step outside while you change for bed," Kane offered, grabbing his hat. "Thank you." Hope's voice was quiet, her cheeks flushed pink in the lamplight. Kane stood in the hotel hallway for a good 10 minutes, giving Hope plenty of time, before knocking softly and waiting for her invitation to return. She was already in bed, covers pulled up to her chin, her hair loose around her shoulders in waves of auburn that made Kane's fingers itch with the desire to touch. He changed quickly with his back turned, intensely aware of her presence, then settled into his own bed on the far side of the room. "Kane!" Hope's voice came softly through the darkness after he extinguished the lamp. "Yes. I just wanted to say that these past 5 days have been some of the strangest but also the nicest of my life." I know that probably sounds foolish, given that we are running from the law and I have turned your entire life upside down, but I wanted you to know I appreciate everything you have done. The way you have treated me with respect and kindness, even though you barely know me. It means more than I can properly express. Kane felt his throat tighten with emotion. It does not sound foolish at all. I have enjoyed these days too, getting to know you, having someone to talk to who understands. You have not turned my life upside down, Hope. You have given me a reason to build something better than what I had before. Still, Hope persisted. I want you to know that if you ever regret this choice, if you ever wish you had taken me back to Sacramento instead of burning that warrant, I will understand. I will not hold it against you. Hope Dawson, Kane said firmly. I have made exactly 3 choices in my life that I know with absolute certainty were the right ones. Becoming a lawman was the first, because it taught me what I needed to know about justice and injustice. Burning that warrant was the second, because it meant I still had enough of my soul left to recognize wrong when I saw it. And marrying you was the third, because whether this remains a marriage of convenience or becomes something more, I know in my bones that you are a person worth standing beside. So please, stop worrying that I will regret any of this. The only thing I regret is not getting to you sooner, before you had to run and hide and scrub church floors to survive. Silence filled the room, broken only by the distant sounds of the town outside their window. Then Hope spoke, her voice thick with tears. Thank you for saying that. I think I needed to hear it. It is nothing but the truth. Kane rolled onto his side, wishing he could see her face in the darkness. Now get some sleep. We have a stage coach to catch in the morning. They boarded the northbound stage the next day, sharing the cramped space with a mining equipment salesman, a widow returning to her family in Portland, and a young couple so obviously newlywed they could barely keep their hands off each other. The salesman proved to be a talker, filling the hours with stories of strikes and claims while the widow dozed, and the newlyweds whispered to each other. Kane found himself watching the young couple with mixed feelings. They could not be much older than 20, full of bright hope and clear devotion, unconsciously demonstrating what a real marriage looked like. The way the husband steadied his wife when the stage hit rough patches, how she brushed dust from his shoulder with casual affection, the private smiles they shared that needed no words to convey meaning, all of it highlighted the artificiality of Kane and Hope's arrangement. Yet as the days of travel wore on, Kane began to notice similar patterns developing between him and Hope. The way she automatically leaned into him when she dozed off, trusting him to keep her steady. How he had started anticipating her needs, offering his canteen before she asked, positioning himself to shield her from the dust that blew through the windows. The conversations that flowed easily between them, ranging from serious to playful, building a foundation of friendship that felt solid despite its newness. They changed stages in Oregon, then again in Idaho, each leg of the journey carrying them further from California and closer to Montana. Word had not yet spread about Kane destroying the warrant, his final report to his supervisor apparently accepted without question, buying them the precious time they needed to disappear completely. It was during a 3-day layover in Boise, waiting for the Montana-bound stage, that everything shifted between them. They had taken a room at a boarding house run by a cheerful woman who assumed they were a married couple traveling to start a ranch, which was true enough not to require any lies. The room was smaller than the one in Redding with only one bed, and the boarding house keeper did not seem to think anything of it. I can sleep on the floor, Kane offered immediately, eyeing the narrow bed. Hope looked at the bed, then at Kane, clearly wrestling with propriety versus practicality. That seems ridiculous when there is a perfectly good bed here. We are adults and we are married, even if the circumstances are unusual. I trust you, Kane. We can share the bed without anything inappropriate happening. Kane was not sure his body agreed with Hope's assessment of what would or would not happen, but he nodded. If you are comfortable with it. That first night, they lay stiffly on opposite edges of the mattress, both determinedly facing away from each other, the small space between them charged with awareness. But sometime in the night, Kane woke to find Hope curled against his side, her head on his shoulder and one arm draped across his chest. She was deeply asleep, her breathing even and peaceful, and Kane made the conscious choice not to move away. Instead, he lay there in the darkness, feeling the warmth of her body against his, the trust implicit in the way she had unconsciously sought him out, and acknowledged what had been growing in his heart since the moment he struck that match in the church. He was falling in love with his wife of convenience, with her strength and intelligence, her dry humor and fierce determination, the way she met life's challenges with grace even when she must be terrified inside. It was madness to feel this way after barely 3 weeks, but Kane had learned during his years as a lawman that time was a poor measure of anything important. He had known men who courted women for years and made terrible husbands, and others who married after brief acquaintances and built partnerships that lasted lifetimes. What mattered was not the duration but the depth, the willingness to truly see another person and choose them anyway. In the morning, Hope woke to find herself wrapped around Kane, and pulled away with profuse apologies that he waved off with what he hoped was casual unconcern. But that night, when she curled against him again, Kane allowed his arm to settle around her shoulders, and Hope made a small sound of contentment that shot straight through him. On their last day in Boise, they walked through the growing town together, stopping to watch children play and examine shop windows displaying goods from back east. Kane bought Hope a simple necklace from a jeweler, a silver chain with a small pendant shaped like a horseshoe, claiming it was lucky. "You have already given me so much," Hope protested, even as her fingers traced the delicate chain with obvious pleasure. "A man should be able to buy his wife a gift without needing justification," Kane replied, then added more softly, "Besides, I wanted you to have something pretty, something that is yours alone and not born of necessity or fear." Hope looked up at him with an expression Kane could not quite read, complex and layered with emotions he desperately wanted to understand. "You are a dangerous man, Kane Dawson." "Dangerous?" Kane raised an eyebrow. "I have been called many things, but dangerous is usually reserved for the outlaws." "Dangerous to my heart," Hope clarified quietly. "You keep doing these kind things, saying these perfect words, treating me like I matter, and I am starting to forget that our marriage is supposed to be a practical arrangement. That is dangerous, because what if you do not feel the same way? What if I am reading meaning into gestures that are simply you being a good man helping someone in need?" Kane's pulse hammered in his throat as he recognized the opening Hope was offering, the vulnerability in her admission. They stood on a busy street in Boise with people flowing around them, but it felt like they were the only two people in the world. And what if you are not reading meaning where none exists? What if I have been struggling with the same question, wondering if you could ever see me as more than the lawman who helped you escape? Hope's eyes widened. "Kane, I am falling in love with you, Hope." The words came out in a rush, too important to hold back any longer. "I know it is fast and probably foolish and completely against the terms of our original agreement, but it is the truth. I am falling in love with your courage and your kindness. The way you never complain even when you are exhausted, how you laugh at my terrible jokes and ask thoughtful questions about horses, even though you must be bored senseless by my long explanations. I am falling in love with waking up to find you curled against me, and the way you look at the mountains like they hold all the answers to questions you have not asked yet. And I understand completely if you do not feel the same way, if this is still just a practical arrangement for you. I will honor our agreement and never pressure you or make you uncomfortable, but you deserve to know the truth of where my heart stands. Hope stared at him for a long moment, emotions chasing across her face too quickly for Kane to identify. Then, right there on the street in broad daylight with half of boys as witnesses, she rose on her toes and kissed him. Not the brief, formal kiss of their wedding, but a real kiss full of warmth and promise and answered feelings. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hope kept her hands on Kane's chest and smiled up at him with joy radiating from every line of her face. I am falling in love with you too, you impossible, wonderful man. I have been trying so hard not to, trying to protect my heart in case this was all just kindness on your part, but I cannot help it. You make me feel safe and seen and valued in ways I did not know were possible. So yes, Kane Dawson, I am absolutely falling in love with you, and I think maybe our marriage of convenience is becoming something much more real. Kane pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and burying his face in her hair while his heart threatened to beat right out of his chest. Thank God, I was terrified I was alone in this. Hope laughed against his shoulder. We are both fools, apparently, falling in love while running from the law, but I cannot bring myself to regret it. Neither can I. Kane pulled back enough to look at her face, memorizing this moment. Though I should mention that I plan to court you properly now. We may have done things backward, marrying first and falling in love after, but that does not mean you should miss out on being wooed. Wooed? Hope's eyes sparkled with amusement. Are you planning to write me poetry, Marshal Dawson? My poetry is terrible. You would hate it, Kane admitted cheerfully. But I can pick wildflowers and share my dessert and find excuses to hold your hand in public. All the traditional courting behaviors, just compressed into a marriage that already exists. I look forward to it. Hope laced her fingers through his, demonstrating the hand-holding concept, and they walked back to the boarding house together with everything between them transformed and new. That night, they lay facing each other in the narrow bed, talking quietly in the darkness about everything and nothing, learning each other with words and gentle touches that stayed strictly within appropriate bounds. Kane traced the line of Hope's jaw with careful fingers, and she explored the planes of his face like a precious map. And they kissed until they were both breathless and aching but chose to wait, wanting their first night together as true husband and wife to be in their own home, on their own land, with all the running and hiding finally behind them. The stage to Montana left the next morning, carrying them across the last stretches of their journey. The landscape gradually shifted, the dense forests giving way to rolling plains and distant mountains, the big sky country Kane had described beginning to reveal itself. Hope pressed her face to the window, drinking in the vast open spaces with an expression of wonder that made Kane fall even deeper in love. They arrived in Helena, Montana territory, on a crisp September morning with autumn already painting the hills in gold and crimson. The town was bigger than Kane had expected, grown prosperous from the gold strikes of Last Chance Gulch, but still maintaining the raw frontier energy that he remembered from his youth. They disembarked from the stage stiff and exhausted, their funds running lower than Kane liked but still sufficient to sustain them while they found land. "It is beautiful," Hope breathed, turning in a slow circle to take in the mountains rising all around them. "I had no idea places like this existed," Kane grinned, pleased by her reaction. Wait until you see it in winter when the snow lies 3 feet deep and the air is so cold it hurts to breathe. You will be cursing me then." "Never," Hope said firmly, linking her arm through his. "So where do we start, husband? How does one go about finding a ranch in Montana?" The word husband coming from her lips in that affectionate tone made Kane's heart skip. "First we find a hotel and a decent meal. Then we visit the land office and see what is available. The Homestead Act means we can claim 160 acres for free if we are willing to improve it, but we will need money for supplies, livestock, and building materials. I have about $800 saved from my marshal's pay. Is that enough to start with?" Hope did quick calculations in her head, that bookkeeper's brain working. "If we are very careful and do most of the work ourselves, yes. We will need to file our claim before winter sets in hard, get at least a basic cabin built, and acquire enough supplies to survive until spring. It will be tight, but possible." They spent 2 days in Helena, researching available land and purchasing basic supplies. The land office clerk proved helpful, spreading maps across his desk and pointing out parcels still open for homesteading. Kane studied the options carefully, looking for land with access to water, timber for building, and grazing potential. This one, he finally decided, tapping a section about 15 miles north of Helena along a creek called Prickly Pear. 160 acres, creek runs right through it, stand of pine at the northern edge for timber, and south-facing slope that will be good for a house. What do you think? Hope studied the map, asking questions about water rights, neighboring claims, and access routes that demonstrated her sharp mind and business sense. Finally, she nodded. "It looks ideal. Let us stake our claim." The paperwork was filed, the fees paid, and suddenly Kane and Hope Dawson were landowners, possessors of 160 acres of Montana territory that they had never actually seen. The clerk provided rough directions, and they used the last of their stage fare to hire a wagon and team to transport their supplies to the property. The reality of their land proved even better than the map suggested. The creek ran clear and cold, fed by mountain snowmelt, and the pine grove was substantial enough to provide all the timber they would need for building. The south-facing slope the clerk had mentioned offered a natural building site with good drainage and a view that stretched for miles across the valley below. "Home," Hope whispered, standing on the slope with wind whipping her hair and the vast Montana sky stretching overhead. "This is going to be our home." Kane came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. "Home," he agreed. "Are you ready for the hard work that is going to entail?" Hope leaned back against him, solid and certain. "With you, I am ready for anything." They spent the remaining weeks of autumn in a frenzy of work that left them exhausted every night but deeply satisfied. Kane felled trees and stripped logs while Hope prepared the building site, clearing stones and leveling the ground. Together they notched the logs and raised the walls of a cabin, small by most standards but sufficient for their needs, with a single main room dominated by a stone fireplace and a sleeping loft above. The work was brutally hard, especially as autumn advanced toward winter and the days grew shorter and colder. They rose before dawn and worked until dark, falling into their bedrolls too tired for anything except sleep. Yet there was profound satisfaction in seeing the cabin take shape, in knowing that every log they placed was building something that belonged to them, that no Victor Blackwell could ever take away. The neighbors, few and far between in this sparsely populated region, proved welcoming. A couple named Sarah and Tom Morrison, homesteading about 3 miles downstream, came by with offers of help and friendship. Tom assisted Kane with raising the roof beams, work that required more hands than two, while Sarah taught Hope tricks for cooking over an open fire and preserving food for winter. "You two are newlyweds?" Sarah asked one afternoon while she and Hope prepared venison stew. She was a weathered woman in her 40s with kind eyes and capable hands, the type who had seen hardship and survived it with grace and tact. "We married in California 3 months ago," Hope replied, which was technically true even if it omitted the unusual circumstances. "This is our first real home together." Sarah smiled knowingly. "I remember those early days with Tom, everything so new and exciting even when it was difficult. Cherish this time, honey. It goes by faster than you think." Hope glanced over to where Kane and Tom were working on the cabin, her husband's shirt soaked with sweat despite the cool air, his face focused with concentration as he hammered in support beams. Husband. The word still gave her a small thrill every time she thought it, remembering how this had started as a marriage of convenience and transformed into something real and deep and true. "I intend to," Hope said softly. The first snow fell on a late October evening, big fat flakes that drifted down like blessing while Kane and Hope stood on the porch of their nearly completed cabin and watched the landscape transform into white magic. They had finished the roof that morning, making the structure weatherproof with hours to spare, and the sense of accomplishment was almost overwhelming. "We did it," Kane said, his arm around Hope's shoulders. "We actually did it." Hope turned in his embrace, looking up at him with love shining clear in her eyes. "We make a good team, Kane Dawson." "The best," he agreed, then kissed her as snowflakes caught in her hair and melted against their joined warmth. That night, for the first time since they married, they made their marriage complete and real in every sense. They had been waiting for this moment, for their own home and privacy, and it was everything Kane had imagined and more. Hope came to him without reservation or fear, trusting him completely, and Kane worshipped her with hands and lips and whispered words of love that made her gasp his name like a prayer. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in their bed in the sleeping loft, quilts piled high against the cold, while snow continued to fall outside and the fire crackled in the hearth below. Hope traced patterns on Kane's chest, her touch sending shivers through him that had nothing to do with temperature. "I love you," she said simply, as if the words were too important to dress up with elaborate phrasing. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes, how completely I have given you my heart." Kane captured her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I love you too, more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. You are my home, Hope, not this cabin or this land, but you. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." Hope's eyes grew bright with tears, but she was smiling. "How did I get so lucky? I was running for my life, terrified and alone, and somehow I found you." "I think maybe we found each other," Kane replied. "Two people who needed exactly what the other could offer." They made love again as the fire burned low, taking their time now, learning each other's bodies with patience and care, and afterwards fell asleep wrapped so tightly together it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Winter in Montana proved every bit as brutal as Kane had warned. The snow piled deep, temperatures plunged to bone-numbing lows, and there were days when stepping outside for more than a few minutes risked frostbite. But inside their snug cabin, Kane and Hope built a life together that was rich despite its simplicity. They read by firelight from the small collection of books they had acquired, took turns cooking meals that grew creative as they stretched their supplies, and talked for hours about everything under the sun. Kane taught Hope to play chess using pieces he carved from wood scraps, and she taught him to calculate complex equations in his head, a skill that proved surprisingly useful for planning their ranch. On clear days, They ventured out to check their small herd of 6 horses Kane had purchased in late autumn, 3 mares, and a young stallion with good bloodlines that would form the foundation of the breeding program Kane envisioned. Hope proved to have a natural way with the animals, patient and gentle, and the horses responded to her with trust that usually took months to develop. "You have a gift," Kane observed one afternoon as he watched Hope work with a skittish mare, coaxing her to accept a halter through nothing but soft words and steady presence. Hope glanced at him with surprise. "I am just doing what you taught me." "No, you are doing more than that." Kane leaned against the fence, admiring his wife's grace and competence. "You have instincts that cannot be taught, the ability to read what an animal needs and respond appropriately. That mare was terrified of people when I bought her, probably mistreated by a previous owner. But look at her with you, calm and trusting. That is all you, Hope." Hope blushed with pleasure at the praise, and Kane made a mental note to compliment her more often. She had spent too much of her life being undervalued, told by society and Victor Blackwell that her intelligence and capabilities did not matter. Kane was determined to spend the rest of his life proving them wrong. As winter slowly gave way to spring, they began to prepare for the coming growing season. Hope planned a garden with the same meticulous attention to detail she applied to everything, calculating yields and spacing while Kane built raised beds from lumber he had milled during the winter. They ordered seeds from a Helena merchant, precious packets of vegetables that would supplement their diet and reduce dependency on expensive store-bought goods. It was during the first week of April, with snow still lingering in shaded patches, but the creek running high with melt, that their peaceful life was interrupted by visitors on horseback. Kane saw them coming from a distance, 2 men riding up the valley at a pace suggesting purpose rather than casual travel. His instincts, honed by 6 years as a lawman, immediately screamed warning. He whistled sharply, a signal he and Hope had established for danger, and she emerged from the cabin with the rifle they kept loaded by the door. "Get inside and stay low," Kane instructed, his hand moving to his own revolver. "If shooting starts, you know what to do." Hope's face had gone pale but determined. "Be careful." The riders pulled up about 20 yards from the cabin, hands deliberately visible and empty of weapons, a show of peaceful intent that did nothing to ease Kane's tension. One was a young man, maybe 25, with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. The other was older, lean and hard-eyed, with a marshal's star that made Kane's blood run cold. "Kane Dawson," the marshal called out. "Name is Marshal Raymond Tucker. I need to speak with you about a matter from California." Kane stepped into view, rifle held loosely but ready. "Then speak, Marshal. But know that if you have come here looking for trouble, you will find more than you bargained for." Tucker raised his hand slightly, placating. "Easy now. I am not here to arrest anyone or cause problems. I just need some questions answered, and then we will be on our way." "What kind of questions?" Kane did not lower the rifle. "About a warrant that went missing last August. Warrant for a woman named Hope Winchester, wanted for theft in Sacramento. You were the marshal assigned to bring her in, according to the last report filed by the district supervisor." Kane's mind raced, calculating options and consequences. 6 months had passed since he burned that warrant. He had hoped enough time had gone by that no one would care about one missing thief among the hundreds of criminals moving through the West. Apparently, he had been wrong. The warrant went missing. Kane kept his voice carefully neutral. "How unfortunate. Cut the games, Dawson." Tucker's voice turned hard. "Your final report said the trail went cold, that Winchester likely fled to Oregon or Mexico. But we both know that was horseshit. A federal warrant does not just vanish, and women do not disappear into thin air. So I will ask you straight out, did you find Hope Winchester? Kane met the marshal's gaze steadily. I found a woman matching the description in a settlement near Coloma. When I approached her to make the arrest, she ran. I tracked her for 3 days before losing the trail in rough country. That is exactly what I reported, and it is the truth as far as it goes. And the warrant itself, Tucker pressed. The actual physical document, lost in a river crossing, Kane lied smoothly. Horse spooked, saddlebags got soaked, and by the time I retrieved them, several documents including that warrant were ruined. I filed a report about it with the supply office, requested replacements. Tucker studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing the story for truth. Convenient timing. Accidents happen, Marshal. You know that as well as I do. Kane shifted his weight slightly, ready to move fast if needed. Is there anything else? Because I have work to do. The younger deputy spoke up, his voice uncertain. There is talk that you married around that same time, left California with a new wife. Some folks find the timing curious. Kane forced a laugh. Curious? I met a woman, fell in love, and got married. Happens every day across this country. What does my marriage have to do with a missing thief? Your wife, Tucker said slowly. Mind if we meet her? Just to satisfy my curiosity that she is not Hope Winchester under a new name. Every protective instinct Kane possessed screamed at the idea of letting these men anywhere near Hope, but refusing would only make them more suspicious. My wife is inside the cabin and she is not accustomed to strangers. But if you give me your word that you will be respectful and brief, I will introduce you. Try anything threatening, though, and you will regret it. Tucker nodded agreement, and Kane called out for Hope to come outside. She emerged a moment later, and Kane's heart swelled with pride at her composure despite the fear he could see in her eyes. She had changed her appearance subtly over the winter, letting her hair grow longer and bleaching it slightly with chamomile tea so the auburn had lighter tones. Combined with the weight she had gained from regular meals and hard physical work, she looked different enough from the sketch on the wanted poster that Kane prayed it would be sufficient. Marshal Tucker, Deputy. Kane paused, realizing he did not know the younger man's name. Harris, the deputy supplied. Marshal Tucker, Deputy Harris, this is my wife, Hope Dawson. Hope inclined her head politely, the perfect image of a frontier wife greeting unexpected guests. Gentlemen, can I offer you coffee? We do not have much, but you are welcome to what we have. Tucker studied Hope intently, and Kane forced himself to remain relaxed, projecting innocence and openness. Finally, the marshal shook his head. No thank you, madam. We do not want to take up any more of your time. You and your husband have a nice spread here. We are blessed, Hope replied simply. Tucker gathered his reins, preparing to leave, then paused. Just one more question, Mrs. Dawson. Your maiden name, if you do not mind. Kane's hand edged toward his gun, ready to draw if Hope's answer provoked a negative reaction, but Hope smiled calmly. Whitfield. Hope Whitfield, though that feels like a lifetime ago now. It was a brilliant lie, so close to Winchester that Hope could use the same initials on any belongings she had brought from California, but different enough not to immediately raise flags. Tucker nodded slowly, then touched his hat in farewell. Thank you both for your time. Sorry to disturb you. Kane and Hope stood together watching the two lawmen ride away, not moving or speaking until they disappeared over the ridge. Then Hope's knees buckled and Kane caught her, holding her tight as she shook with reaction. You were perfect, he murmured into her hair. Absolutely perfect. They believed you. How can you be sure? Hope's voice was muffled against his chest. Because if Tucker suspected anything, he would not have left. He would have found an excuse to stay, to ask more questions, to dig deeper. Kane pulled back to look at her face. But he saw exactly what we wanted him to see: a married couple homesteading in Montana, completely ordinary and boring. "We are safe, Hope. They are not coming back." Hope searched his eyes, looking for certainty, then finally nodded. "I was so frightened. When I saw those badges, I thought everything was over." "It will never be over," Kane said honestly. "Not completely. There is always a chance someone will recognize you, that questions will be asked. But each day that passes, each season we survive here, it becomes less likely. Victor Blackwell's influence does not reach Montana. We are building a new life, and eventually the old one will fade into history." Hope hugged him tightly. "I love you, Kane Dawson. Thank you for protecting me, for giving me this chance." "Always," Kane promised. "I will always protect you." They did not speak of the visit again, both silently agreeing to let it lie in the past where it belonged. Instead, they threw themselves into the work of spring with renewed determination, planting Hope's garden and expanding the corral to accommodate the growing horse herd. The 3 mares all proved to be in foal, a stroke of luck that delighted Kane and would give them 5 horses by summer's end. As the days lengthened and warmed, Kane began working with the young stallion, a beautiful bay with excellent conformation and a temperament that balanced spirit with intelligence. He named the horse Testament because he represented a testimony to what could be built from nothing with patience and care. Hope spent her days tending the garden, working with the gentler mares, and keeping their accounts in meticulous ledgers. She had a natural head for business, recognizing opportunities and calculating costs with precision that impressed Kane deeply. When a neighbor offered to trade breeding rights for Testament in exchange for hay and oats they would need for winter, Hope negotiated terms that were fair but advantageous, ensuring they got the better end of the deal without insulting the neighbor. "You are a natural at this," Kane told her that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Running the business side of the ranch, I mean. You see angles I would miss." Hope leaned her head against his shoulder. "I enjoy it. There is satisfaction in making the numbers work, in finding ways to stretch resources and build toward the future." "Is that strange?" "Not at all." Kane kissed the top of her head. "Everyone has different gifts. Mine happen to involve horses and physical labor. Yours involve planning and strategy and seeing 3 steps ahead. Together, we make a formidable team." "Together," Hope echoed with contentment. "I like the sound of that." Summer arrived in a rush of heat and growth, the garden exploding with vegetables while the prairie grasses grew high and thick. Kane and Hope worked side by side, cutting and stacking hay for winter feed, repairing fences, and preparing for the arrival of the foals. The first birth happened on a warm June night, one of the mares delivering a sturdy colt with Testament's bay coloring and a white star on his forehead. Kane helped with the delivery, his hands sure and gentle as he guided the foal into the world and ensured both mother and baby were healthy. Hope watched with tears streaming down her face, moved by the miracle of new life and the tenderness her husband showed to the animals. "You are going to be an amazing father someday," she said softly after the mare and foal were settled. Kane looked up at her, surprise and hope mingling in his expression. "Is that something you want, children?" Hope had been thinking about this question for months, ever since their marriage became real in every sense. "Yes," she admitted. "Not immediately, perhaps. I want us to be more established first, to have the ranch secure and thriving. But someday, yes. I want to have your children, Kane. I want to build a family with you." Kane crossed to her and cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away the tears still dampening her cheeks. "I want that too. More than I can express." The idea of a little girl with your green eyes or a boy with your stubborn determination, it makes my heart ache in the best possible way." They kissed in the barn with the smell of hay and horses surrounding them, and the new foal nickering softly in his stall. And Hope felt her future solidifying into something real and beautiful, and completely worth every hardship she had endured to get here. The other two mares foaled within a week of each other, giving Kane and Hope a total of 5 horses plus 3 new foals, the beginning of the breeding program Kane had dreamed about since boyhood. Word spread among the scattered ranches and homesteads about the quality of Testament's offspring, and inquiries began arriving about breeding services and eventual sales. Hope managed the inquiries with professional efficiency, quoting prices and setting terms while Kane handled the actual breeding and training. They made a seamless team, each playing to their strengths, and by late summer they had booked enough breeding contracts to ensure a solid income stream for the coming year. It was during an August evening, exactly 1 year after Kane had burned the warrant that changed both their lives, that Hope told him she was pregnant. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, a habit they had fallen into during warm weather, when Hope took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is something I need to tell you." Kane looked at her, reading something significant in her expression. "What is it?" "I am carrying our child," Hope said simply, her voice trembling with joy and nervousness. "I missed my monthly time, and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings. I am fairly certain I am about 6 weeks along." Kane stared at her, the words taking a moment to fully register. Then he let out a whoop of pure joy that probably carried all the way to the Morrison homestead. He pulled Hope into his arms, careful even in his excitement, and held her like she was made of spun glass. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." Hope laughed, the sound bright and free. "Are you happy? I know we said we wanted to wait longer, but happy?" Kane pulled back to look at her face, wanting her to see the truth in his eyes. "Hope, I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic. I am the luckiest man alive. You are giving me a family, a real family, and I love you more than words can possibly convey." They spent the evening making plans, discussing everything from names to how they would need to expand the cabin to accommodate a child. Kane was already mentally designing a cradle, and Hope was calculating the supplies they would need before winter made travel difficult. "We should tell the Morrisons," Kane suggested. "Sarah will have advice about pregnancy and childbirth, things you will need to know." Hope nodded, though Kane saw a flicker of anxiety cross her face. "I just wish my mother were here. She died when I was 12, and there is so much I do not know about being a mother myself." Kane gathered her close again, offering what comfort he could. "You will figure it out because you are smart and capable and the most determined person I know. And you will not be alone. I will be with you every step of the way, and we have good neighbors who will help. Our child is going to be so loved, Hope, so incredibly loved." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through autumn and into winter, Hope's belly growing round while she continued to work around the ranch with stubborn determination. Kane worried constantly, insisting she rest more and work less, but Hope laughed at his overprotectiveness while secretly being touched by it. Sarah Morrison proved invaluable, visiting regularly to check on Hope and offer guidance on everything from nutrition to what to expect during labor. She brought baby clothes her own children had outgrown and shared stories of her 4 births, both reassuring and terrifying Hope in equal measure. "Labor is hard," Sarah said bluntly during one visit. "Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. But it is also the most purposeful pain you will ever experience, because at the end of it, you get to meet your child, and that makes everything worthwhile." Hope appreciated the honesty, the way Sarah did not try to sugarcoat the reality of what was coming. She spent the long winter evenings preparing, sewing tiny clothes and blankets while Kane built the cradle he had promised, crafting it from pine with careful attention to detail, and finishing it smooth as silk, so no splinters could harm delicate skin. The baby was due in late April, and as the date approached, Kane grew increasingly anxious. He double-checked their supplies obsessively, rode to Helena to ensure the doctor there knew he might be summoned, and generally drove Hope to distraction with his hovering. "Kane," she finally said one evening when he was rearranging the medical supplies for the third time, "I love you, but you need to calm down. Women have been giving birth since the beginning of time. I will be fine." "You do not know that," Kane argued, unable to articulate the cold terror that gripped him every time he thought about the dangers of childbirth. He had seen too many women die in labor during his years as a lawman, too many men left widowed with newborn babies to care for alone. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you?" Hope crossed to him and took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Listen to me, Kane Dawson. I am strong and healthy, and I have Sarah to help and you to support me. I am not planning to die in childbirth, and I need you to believe that I am going to come through this just fine. Can you do that for me? Can you have faith?" Kane took a shuddering breath and nodded. "I can try. I just love you so much, Hope. The thought of a world without you in it is unbearable." "Then hold on to that love," Hope said softly. "Let it give you strength instead of fear. Our baby is going to need a father who believes in the future, not one paralyzed by worry." She was right, as usual, and Kane made a conscious effort to rein in his anxiety. When Hope's labor started on a warm April afternoon, he forced himself to remain calm and supportive, following Sarah's instructions to heat water and gather clean linens while the two women worked together through the contractions. The labor lasted 8 hours, and every minute of it was torture for Kane, listening to Hope's cries of pain and feeling utterly helpless. He held her hand when she wanted him close and retreated when Sarah said to give them space, trusting the experienced midwife to know what was needed. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the cabin in golden light, a baby's cry pierced the air. Kane, who had been pacing outside on the porch, burst through the door to find Sarah holding a tiny red-faced infant while Hope lay exhausted but smiling in the bed. "You have a son," Sarah announced, grinning broadly. "A healthy, loud son who appears to have excellent lungs." Kane crossed to the bed on shaky legs, looking down at Hope and the baby she was already reaching for. Sarah placed the infant in Hope's arms, and Kane sat on the edge of the bed, staring in wonder at the tiny person they had created together. "He is perfect," Kane whispered, touching a careful finger to the baby's impossibly small hand. The infant immediately gripped it, holding on with surprising strength, and Kane felt his heart crack open with a love so fierce it hurt. "Absolutely perfect." Hope looked up at him with exhaustion and joy shining in her eyes. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything definitive. Now, looking at his son's face, Kane knew with absolute certainty what this child should be called. Jesse Thomas Dawson, after my father and yours." Hope's eyes filled with tears. "Jesse Thomas." "I love it. Hello, Jesse. Welcome to the world, little one." The baby, oblivious to the emotion surrounding him, simply yawned and snuggled against his mother's chest, content and already utterly loved beyond measure. Sarah stayed for a few more hours, ensuring Hope was recovering well and showing Kane how to change nappies and swaddle the baby. When she finally left with promises to return the next day, Kane and Hope were alone with their son for the first time. "I cannot believe he is real," Hope said softly, cradling Jesse while Kane sat beside them. that we made this perfect little person. Kane wrapped his arm around both of them, his family, feeling more complete than he had ever imagined possible. 1 year ago, I was a lawman trekking a wanted woman through California. Now I am a husband and a father, with a ranch and a future that is everything I ever wanted but never thought I would have. How did I get so lucky? We got lucky, Hope corrected, leaning her head against his shoulder. Both of us. We found each other exactly when we needed to, and we built something beautiful together. They sat in the gathering darkness, lit only by the fire and the overwhelming love that filled their small cabin, and Kane silently thanked whatever forces had brought him to that church in Coloma, to the moment when he chose to burn a warrant instead of destroying an innocent woman's life. It had been the riskiest decision of his life and absolutely the right one. Jesse grew quickly, a healthy baby with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Kane proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor at night when Jesse fussed and changing nappies without complaint. He talked to his son constantly, telling him about the horses and the land, and everything they would do together as Jesse grew older. Hope recovered from the birth with remarkable speed, her strength reasserting itself as she threw herself back into running the ranch. They hired a neighbor boy to help with some of the heavier work, giving Hope time to care for Jesse while still managing the business side of the operation. The breeding program continued to thrive, Testament's reputation spreading through Montana territory and into the surrounding regions. By Jesse's first birthday, they had a waiting list for breeding services and had sold 2 yearlings for prices that seemed almost too good to be true. The ranch that had started as a desperate gamble was becoming a genuine success. On a warm summer evening when Jesse was toddling around on unsteady legs and chattering in his own private language, Kane and Hope sat on the porch watching their son play. Hope's hand rested on her stomach, and Kane noticed the gesture had become familiar lately. "Hope," he asked carefully, "is there something you want to tell me?" Hope smiled, that particular smile that made Kane's heart skip beats. "I think Jesse is going to be a big brother come winter. I wanted to be certain before I said anything, but yes, I am pregnant again." Joy flooded through Kane, though this time it was tempered with the knowledge of what pregnancy and childbirth entailed. "How do you feel about it?" "Happy," Hope said simply. "A little nervous, but mostly happy. I always imagined having more than one child, and Jesse should have siblings to grow up with. I just hope this pregnancy is as smooth as the last one." It was, though the birth in February proved more difficult, lasting nearly 12 hours and leaving Hope exhausted. But the result was a beautiful daughter with Kane's dark hair and a stubborn determination that was evident from the moment she started crying. They named her Emma Grace, and Jesse, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his tiny sister. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the joy of watching their children grow. Jesse proved to have his father's affinity for horses, toddling fearlessly among the animals and showing patience beyond his years. Emma was more cautious but equally determined, a thinker who observed carefully before acting. Kane expanded the breeding program, acquiring new bloodlines and building a reputation throughout Montana and beyond for quality horses with excellent temperaments. Hope managed the business with skill that would have made any banker envious, keeping meticulous records and negotiating deals that consistently advantaged them. They added 2 more children to their family over the next years, another boy named Samuel and a daughter called Lily. The cabin was expanded twice to accommodate the growing family, and Kane built a proper barn and indoor training arena that allowed work to continue even in the worst winter weather. On a fall evening when Kane was 43 and Hope was 40, They sat on the porch of their expanded home watching their 4 children play in the yard. Jesse was 16 now, tall and capable, already handling much of the training work. Emma at 14 was managing the books alongside her mother, showing the same head for business. Samuel and Lily, 12 and 10 respectively, were arguing cheerfully about whose turn it was to collect eggs from the chicken coop they had added years ago. "We have done well," Hope said softly, her hand finding Kane's as naturally as breathing. "Better than I ever imagined possible when I was scrubbing that church floor in Coloma." Kane brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles in a gesture that had become habit over their 20 years together. "We have done more than well. We have built a real life full of love and purpose. And it all started because I chose to strike a match instead of following orders." Hope laughed, the sound still as bright as it had been that first day. "Best decision you ever made burning that warrant." "Second best," Kane corrected. "The best decision was asking you to marry me." "Technically, it was Reverend Collins's idea," Hope teased. "Semantics." Kane pulled her closer. "The point is, I have loved you for 20 years, Hope Dawson, and I will love you for 20 more and 20 beyond that if we are blessed with the time." Hope turned to kiss him properly, not caring that their children might see and giggle at the sight of their parents being affectionate. "I love you too, Kane, more than words can say. You gave me everything when you chose to help me instead of arresting me. A home, a family, a future. I will never stop being grateful." "You gave me just as much," Kane insisted. "Purpose, love, these incredible children. We saved each other, Hope. That is what makes us perfect partners." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Kane reflected on the twisting path that had brought him here. He had been a lawman who believed in following rules, until he met a woman who made him understand that justice was more important than law. He had burned a warrant and married a wanted woman, risked everything he had built for someone he barely knew, and it had turned out to be the most right decision of his life. The ranch thrived, their horses known throughout the region for quality and temperament. Their children were growing into fine young people, healthy and happy and loved beyond measure. And he and Hope had built a partnership that went deeper than marriage, a true joining of souls that grew stronger with each passing year. Sometimes Kane wondered what had happened to Victor Blackwell, whether he had ever faced consequences for his crimes, but those thoughts came less frequently as time passed. The past was a distant country that had no power over them here in Montana, where they had built something honest and good from nothing but determination and love. Jesse called out that dinner was ready, Emma having helped him cook since it was their turn, and the family gathered around the large table Kane had built to accommodate them all. They held hands while Kane said a simple grace, thanking the heavens for food and family and the land that sustained them. After dinner, as they often did, Hope played the piano Kane had bought her for their 10th anniversary, transported all the way from St. Louis at considerable expense. She played folk songs and hymns while the children sang along, and Kane sat watching his family with a heart so full it felt like it might burst. Later, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Kane and Hope lay together in their room, talking softly about the day and plans for tomorrow. These moments were precious, stolen time between the demands of ranch and family, and they both guarded them jealously. "Do you ever regret it?" Hope asked suddenly. "Giving up being a marshal, I mean. It was important to you once." Kane considered the question seriously, wanting to give her an honest answer. "I do not regret the choice I made, not for a single second. But sometimes I wonder about the man I was before I met you, whether I would recognize him now. Being a lawman taught me a lot about justice and humanity, and I am grateful for those lessons. But this life, here with you and our children, this is where I was always meant to be. I just had to take a long, twisted path to find my way home." Hope was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the same thoughtfulness. "I used to have nightmares about Victor Blackwell finding me, about losing everything we built together. But I have not had one of those dreams in years. I think somewhere along the way, I finally felt safe enough to let go of that fear. You did that for me, Kane. You gave me a life where I did not have to be afraid anymore." "That was always the plan," Kane said, pulling her closer. "To give you a life worth living, free from fear and full of love." "I hope I have succeeded." "You have exceeded every hope I ever had," Hope assured him. "And I plan to spend the rest of my life showing you how grateful I am." They made love slowly and tenderly, a reaffirmation of vows spoken 20 years ago in a small church in California before a reverend who had seen what they could not yet see themselves, that their marriage of convenience was actually fate disguised as practicality. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a covenant renewed. The years continued to pass, marked by milestones and celebrations. Jesse married a rancher's daughter from Helena and brought her to live on the Dawson ranch, expanding the operation further. Emma went to Denver to study business but returned within 2 years, unable to stay away from the land and family she loved. She married a teacher who moved to Montana to be with her, a gentle man who fit seamlessly into the family. Samuel and Lily followed their own paths, both eventually settling nearby with families of their own, creating a network of Dawsons and Dawson relations that stretched across the region. The ranch that Kane and Hope had started with nothing but determination became a genuine legacy, known throughout Montana territory and beyond. On their 30th anniversary, Kane arranged a surprise for Hope. He had hired a photographer to come all the way from Helena, a rare luxury, and gathered the entire extended family for portraits. Hope cried when she saw everyone assembled, 3 generations of Dawsons from Jesse's children down to Emma's infant daughter, all of them existing because Kane had struck a match and burned a warrant 30 years ago. "This is too much," Hope protested through her tears. "You should not have spent the money." "Nothing is too much for you," Kane replied, holding her close while the photographer set up his equipment. "I want us to remember this moment, to have proof of everything we have built together. Years from now, our grandchildren will look at these photographs and see the family that started with an impossible love and faith in each other." The photographs came out beautifully, capturing a moment in time that everyone would treasure. But the image Kane loved most was the one of just him and Hope, standing together on their porch with 30 years of love evident in every line of their faces, the mountains rising behind them and the ranch spread out below, a testament to what could be built from nothing but love and determination. As Kane and Hope grew older, they gradually handed more of the ranch operations to their children, stepping back to become advisors and storytellers. They spent their days working in the garden Hope still tended with devoted care, walking among the horses, and playing with the grandchildren who adored them completely. On warm evenings, they sat on the porch and told stories about the old days, about the Wild West that was rapidly fading into memory as Montana approached statehood. They told their grandchildren about the long journey from California, though they carefully edited out the parts about warrants and running from the law. Some secrets were better kept, even after so much time had passed. Victor Blackwell's fate reached them eventually through a newspaper article that Emma brought home from Helena. He had been arrested for embezzlement, the evidence finally surfacing after years of crimes, and died in prison before his sentence was complete. The judge who had issued Hope's warrant had been forced to resign in disgrace after his own corruption was revealed. Justice caught up with them eventually, Hope said quietly after reading the article. I wondered if it ever would. Kane held her hand, understanding the complicated emotions the news must stir. Are you glad to know? Hope considered the question, then nodded slowly. I suppose I am. It feels like the final chapter of that old story is closed now. Hope Winchester, the wanted woman who stole to expose theft, is truly dead and gone. Only Hope Dawson remains, and she has no regrets about how her life unfolded. They burned the article in the fireplace, turning Victor Blackwell's death notice to ash just as Kane had once turned a warrant to ash, closing a circle that had been open for 35 years. Kane and Hope lived to see Montana achieve statehood in 1889, celebrating with their children and grandchildren the official recognition of the place they had called home for so many years. They lived to see the 20th century arrive, an event that felt both momentous and utterly ordinary. On a spring morning in 1902, when Kane was 69 and Hope was 66, they sat together on the porch watching their youngest grandchild, Jesse's boy, work with a yearling in the corral. The sight of another generation learning the patient art of horse training filled Kane with profound satisfaction. We have had a good life, Kane said suddenly, surprising himself with the words. He had not been planning to become philosophical, but something about the moment demanded acknowledgement. Better than either of us had any right to expect. Hope leaned her head against his shoulder in the gesture that had been their habit for over 40 years. The best life. Full of love and purpose and family. What more could anyone ask for? Nothing, Kane replied simply. This is everything. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the young boy and the horse, seeing in them the continuation of everything they had built. The ranch would go on after they were gone, passed down through generations, and perhaps someday their descendants would tell stories about Kane and Hope, the great-grandparents who had started it all with nothing but faith in each other. As the sun climbed higher and the day's warmth grew, Kane pulled Hope closer and kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her that still had the power to make his heart race even after all these years. She looked up at him, green eyes still bright and full of life, and smiled the smile that had captivated him from the very beginning. I love you, Kane said, words he had spoken thousands of times but which never lost their meaning. I love you too, Hope replied, just as she had thousands of times before, each repetition a renewal of the vows they had made so long ago. They remained there on the porch as the morning stretched toward afternoon. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something miraculous from faith, love, and the courage to choose what was right over what was lawful. The warrant that should have torn them apart had instead brought them together, and the lawman who should have brought the woman in had instead burned the paper and married her, choosing love and justice over duty and law. It had been the right choice then, and it remained the right choice through all the years that followed, a decision that echoed through generations and would continue to echo long after both of them were gone. They had built a legacy not of wealth or power, but of love and family and honest work, and in the end, that was worth more than all the gold in Montana. As the afternoon sun painted the mountains in gold, and the sound of children's laughter drifted from the house behind them, Kane and Hope Dawson held hands and looked out over the land they had tamed together, the family they had created, the life they had built from impossible beginnings. And they knew, with the certainty that comes from a lifetime lived fully and honestly, that every choice they had made, every risk they had taken, every moment of fear and hope and determination, had been absolutely and completely worth it. Their story, which had begun with a warrant and a match, ended not with drama or tragedy, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a love well tended, and a family well raised. And in the end, that was the greatest triumph of all.